In one of my earlier videos, I have an example of parsing XML, and I'm doing it with a learning test like I have here. And we can see that this test is opening up sample.xml, which is here in my test assets. And it's some revision data from Wikipedia. In fact, there are 4 revisions here. And so all this test is doing is checking that there are 4 things in that list of revisions. So if I run these tests, they pass. Great. But a student was asking me about this sort of thing here, that in the learning test, it's sufficient for me to throw the exceptions, because if any of these were to happen, it would indicate that something was wrong with my learning test. But what do we do with those when we migrate this into production code? So that's what I want to show today. And one of the other things I put together just to help with this is a really simple user interface in JavaFX. And oops, that's going to run the same one again. Here, I'll run from here. This is just going to bring up a UI where the idea is we could paste in some XML and then click the parse button, although right now all it does is confirm that we click the button, which you can see right here. Okay, but we'll come back to that in a minute. For now, let's go to the XML learning test and see what if I wanted to write my own parser that would be in my model layer and test that it has a similar behavior where my parser, when I hand it this sample data, is going to say there were 4 revisions. So let me take that as my case study. So I'm going to start by making a new test here, and I'll call this parser test. Yeah, go ahead and add that to Git. And my test is going to say test parse. That's fine. And so if we say, if I have a parser equals new parser, and I say parser.parse, and let's give it the path to that, or the input stream for this resource again. So the trick there is just say get class, get class loader, and get resource as stream sample. There we are, sample.xml. All right, so let's break this out a little bit to make it clearer what's going on here. Let's say I have an input stream called sample input. There. Import that, and if I parse my sample input, let's say this gives me back a list of revisions, and I want to ensure that there are 4 of them returned, which is really the same thing as what's in my learning test, right? So I can just say assert equals 4 revisions dot size. Okay. All right, so it's a little confused, right, because some of this stuff doesn't exist yet, but I think this is the right idea. We're going to have a parser that we're going to create. Here's the input stream to that sample data. If we ask it to parse this, it should give us back a list of revisions, and we want to assert that there are 4 of those. Okay, let's try to write enough code to make this compile and then try to make it work. So just using Alt-Enter here to create this class. And yep, we want it in the source folder. Yes, we'll add it to Git. Okay, good. So there's parser, and we can use this trick here again to create that method. Now we have a parse method. That's fine, although I'm going to call this just input instead. Back over here, revision doesn't exist yet, but that's the domain model. That's the thing that I'm parsing out of the XML. So let's create that class, also in the source folder. Good. And now I can deal with list, and that's just going to be java.util.list, right? Incompatible types. Well, let's see what happened over here. Alt-Enter, import class, list. There we go. Okay, so if I did this right, I should now have a failing unit test. Let's run all the tests. Good. So we remember when we're doing test-driven development, red, green, refactor. So red is the first step. My test fails, but it's a good test. I want this test to work. So now I'll write just enough code to actually make it work. So we'll go back over to the parser, and we will say, let's actually parse this. So let's see, we need a document builder factory. And by the way, all the stuff I'm doing right now is really over here, right? So maybe I'll just copy and paste some over. Let's see, parser, good. yeah, go ahead and import those. Document builder factory, and then we can say document builder dot parse. Whoops, parse input, and that's going to give us back a document in DOM. Let's see, import. Yep, that's good. And all we need to do here is count the number of revisions, which again, right, this is what I already know how to do because I have this test. So if I do this, it's going to look very similar. That's fine. Now the difference is, instead of putting my assert here, I'm going to traverse this node list and make a list of revisions out of it. So let's see, let's do this. List of revision is going to be a new, let's use an array list. That'll be fine. And now we can say, let's see, node list, there's no iterator for it, so we have to do this in kind of an awkward way, I think. Int I is 0, I less than node list dot get length I plus plus. And now we can talk about node list dot item I. Yeah, so this is, again, I can't use the enhanced for loop here because there's no iterator on this API, but this will still get us through every element. Now, notice I'm not actually parsing the content of this. I'm not pulling out the username or the timestamp or anything. All I'm doing right now is counting them. So my revision is going to just stay empty. I'm just going to leave it as it is. Let's see, oops, this is where we want to be. So I'll just say, oh, in that case, I don't even need the item. I can just say list.add new revision. And later, at some point, I can imagine that I'll need to actually do something with this, with the actual node. But for now, this is sufficient, and we'll return that list at the end. So just taking a quick look at this, I don't really like node list and list, so I'm going to call this result because it's the thing I'm making. Now up here, we have this issue of the exceptions, right? I'm going to use Alt-Enter, and it'll say, well, I can add the exception to the method signature. Let's go ahead and just do that for now and take a look. So what we're doing now is saying that when a client calls the parse method, client can be any other agent in our object-oriented system. When it calls this method, any of these three exceptions can be thrown. Are they all of equal weight? Well, not really. Parser configuration exception really shouldn't happen because I'm using the default configuration. I'm not doing any kind of custom configuration there. So maybe I can, I just did Control-Z to get out of there. I think we can handle that one a little differently. But parse, this is the one that goes out through the stream and gets data and does the parsing on it. And so there are many ways this could fail, right? If the stream is empty or the stream is broken, if the data in that stream is not a well-formed XML, I think that'll give an exception here. So these, in a sense, are real exceptions that I need to propagate. So if the caller calls parse and something is wrong with this input stream for whatever reason, then it needs to manage these. This one is a little bit different. I think that's something we can manage locally. I think, so there's this rule of thumb that says whoever catches the exception should be the first responsible party, right? The first place in the code where we can deal with it. So right here, we can deal with it. We can do something like, I wonder if the keyboard shortcut will help. Just surround with try catch. Yeah, that's simple enough. And so this really should never happen, which means I could do something like this. I could wrap the exception in a runtime exception, which is really just a way to throw up our hands and say we don't really know what went wrong. That's kind of undisciplined because that will essentially kill the thread that called this unless there's another exception handler further up the chain. So maybe that's a little too sloppy. Another thing I could do is do something like system.error.print. Oh, I think just print stack trace, right? Yeah, I could just print the stack trace, and then the console will show that something went wrong, but we still haven't really managed it, even though I don't expect this ever to happen. So here's what I'm going to do. This is a nice trick here. I'll put a comment that says, we don't expect this exception to ever be thrown because we're using the default XML configuration. So our solution will be to wrap this exception in an IO exception, which we've already said this can throw, which means somebody further up the chain has to manage this anyway. So I'll just wrap it. So that seems reasonable to me. All right, again, this is really, really fringe, and part of what we're seeing here is that these checked exceptions in Java, they're kind of awful. So, if we're doing Java, we have to deal with it, so here we are. These ones, on the other hand, these sort of make some sense, because these are cases where something legitimately went wrong that the caller needs to handle, because the parser, it doesn't know how to handle this. It doesn't know if we're doing this as part of a script or part of a user interface, or really doesn't know anything about its context. It's just trying to get its job done. Okay, good. Got a couple warnings here. Let's see. Oh, yeah. Initializer null is redundant. I'm just going to ignore those for now. I don't want to deal with them, otherwise the video will get too long. So we'll leave that as an exercise for the reader. Let's get back over to the parser test and see. Now here, I'm going to just throw these exceptions again because I'm in my test method. And just like I mentioned with the learning test, right, if those exceptions come up here, it's because I did something wrong as the person writing the test. It doesn't mean something is weird in my configuration at runtime. It means that my test is poorly formed. So let's go ahead and run this again. Hey, look at that, red-green refactor. Again, I probably should factor out these, or I should redesign this so that I don't have these warnings, but I don't want to deal with it for now. So let's pretend they're not there and carry on. Oh, interesting, there's some kind of a warning here too. It doesn't like, oh, it's that access thing. Yeah, I'm not worried about that. Okay. So now we have this parser that works, this test case that says that this should work. So let's actually integrate it with the main UI, because now we're on the other side, right? We're getting to this parser not from our unit tests, but from the actual application itself. So our first pass would probably look like this. We could say make a parser, and we can say parser.parse. Oh, we need an input stream made out of a string. I should have done my research ahead of time to see how to do that. There's a trick, I just went over Stack Overflow on another screen. So I'm just going to say a new byte array input stream. My string is actually whatever is in XML area .get bytes. Oops. Sorry, get string, get the actual text. There we go. Get bytes, and we want to do this in the standard character set, UTF-8. Oops. There. Okay. Honestly, I don't really like the fact that this is making assumptions about character encodings in UTF-8. For more about this, just go search the internet. For our purposes, we just want to do something like this. There. Nope. Good. And then we parse that input stream. Good. Okay, so this, of course, fails to compile because this parse method can throw some exceptions. And just to show you what happens, I'll use Alt-Enter here to bring up the options. It suggests we surround it with a try-catch, which is a good idea because we need to catch these. Where we are right now, this is the first responsible party, the action listener, the event listener on the button. If you don't like inner classes, you might factor this differently, but this is okay for a tutorial video. All right, so there's two different kind of exceptions that can come out of here. One is IO exception, one is SAX exception. Actually, SAX exception, and this is the warning it's telling us here, I believe it's a subclass of IO exception. So I think we can get away with just that. No, maybe not. Oh, it's identical implementation, that's what it's saying. That's all right. In either case, we have to decide what should happen in our user experience. And I think the simplest thing to do here would be to just pop up a dialog box that says, hey, something went wrong. So let's do that. Do we want to also print the stack trace? Nah. I mean, you could, but I don't want to. So in JavaFX, there's a handy class called alert, which is like a warning dialog box. So I'll make a new alert, and it needs an alert type. Alert type will be warning. So IO exception would happen if there's a problem with the actual connection to the stream, like the network is down or the stream is corrupted. So let's give this some text, which is, yeah, let's just do e.getMessage. That's fine. It's going to be kind of techy, right? So the message that comes out may not be appropriate for non-technical end users. But again, we're not dealing with really full-featured user experience design. We're really just dealing with the ideas of how to manage these exceptions. Alert.show. That's good. Now, this exception, if I'm not mistaken, would happen if the data are not well formatted, right? So if it's not actually well formatted XML. But it turns out we can do kind of the same thing here, right? Because we want to give a warning that says, oh, this thing you gave me, that's not parsable. And since these are the same, I can just use a super type here and kill off these and be done with it. Right, exception is the superclass of all exceptions, so that'll work. Nice. So let's try it. What happens if we run the main UI? And let's give it something that we know is not XML, like that, and say parse it. Uh-oh, content is not allowed in Prolog. So, right, content is not allowed in Prolog. What does that mean? Well, that means that it failed to parse it. It's not really XML. If you don't like that, we could always put a change the message to something like, that's not XML. Then we might need to break out the two different kinds of exceptions again, but right, you get where I'm going with this. You can play with that. What happens if I put in a real XML? Let's just copy that, run the application, paste it in, and say parse. Of course, nothing happens. Why? We haven't told it to do anything. Right? Look at the main UI. Right now, it sets the on action, it makes a parser, blah, 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 never actually does anything. So we can say output field set text parser dot, oh, you know what? What we want here is to get that result out. So we'll get a list of revision. I'd have to initialize that to null, I guess. Alt-enter to import. Down here we can say this is list.size. Let's make this a little prettier. There were that many revisions found. There. That's better. Run this. Let's see, it's still on my clipboard. Paste. Yep. Parse. Oh, cool. That's not at all what I expected. Let's see what happened. Let's see. Null pointer exception in create scene. Output field set text. Yeah, do you see it? Pause the video, look at the screen, and see the silly mistake I made. I'm just going to fix it. How about that? Neat. Change this to whatever. Warning, right? If I turned off my Wi-Fi, which I'm not going to do because I'm on wired internet and it wouldn't make any difference, I could test to see if that IO exception would cause the same trouble. But of course, since I collapsed them into one catch, right, they'll all work the same. All right, so I hope that was useful. We saw a lot of neat stuff here, right? We saw how to take a learning test and move it into production code. And also we looked at what happens to those exceptions when we can be a little lazy with them in our unit tests because we're really dealing with just problems that we created ourselves. Whereas when we deal with end users, we have to be a little bit more careful about crafting a good user experience.